We are told the Great Wall of China is a staggering feat of engineering, a testament to the will of emperors. A line drawn in stone and earth across a continent to keep out the nomadic hordes. We see it as a military fortification, a colossal rampart against flesh and blood enemies. But this is a profound and perhaps deliberate misinterpretation. What if the wall, in its truest, most ancient form, was not built to keep people out, but to keep something in? What if its thousands of kilometers of stone, its countless watchtowers, and its serpentine path along the highest mountain ridges were not designed to stop arrows and cavalry, but to contain a horror our modern world has conveniently forgotten a creeping, silent threat that did not seek to conquer land, but to erase life itself? To understand this, we must look past the history of warring states and see the wall for what it truly is. The largest occult containment device ever constructed. Let's start by re-examining the structure itself. Why is it built the way it is? Standard history provides practical but incomplete answers. The wall clings to the highest, most treacherous mountain ridges. A tactical nightmare for an army to build and supply.
What is
but
it, Father?
a perfect choice if the thing you are trying to contain is not bound by gravity, in the same way we are. Imagine a threat that is less an army and more of a miasma, a creeping ontological decay that flows across the land like a thick, ground-hugging fog. This blight, as we might call it, would naturally pull in low valleys and flatlands, its progress slowed by steep terrain. Building the wall on the highest possible ground was the first and most crucial step. It was a levy against a tide of absolute nothingness, using the Earth's own topography as the primary defense. Then, consider the materials. We know the builders used stone, brick, and tamp earth. But what about the components we can no longer see or analyze? Ancient Chinese alchemy and natural philosophy were far more advanced than we give them credit for. The mortar, famously mixed with sticky rice for strength, may have also contained other, more esoteric ingredients. Outer jade, a stone believed in Chinese tradition to possess immense purity and protective qualities, warding off evil spirits. Cinnabar, not just for its red pigment, but for its mercurial properties, believed to disrupt spiritual or energetic flows. Ground-up fossils they called dragon bones imbued with the ancient power of the earth.
The blight!
This was not
It's
just
coming!
construction.
Run!
It was a planet-scale ritual of warding. Every brick laid, every stone set was part of a complex spell. A line of energetic and spiritual purity drawn across the land that the blight could not easily cross. The wall was not merely a physical barrier, but a psychic and metaphysical one, humming with the power generated by its very composition. The watchtowers, thousands of them, were not just lookout posts for soldiers. In this paradigm, they were the critical nodes of the containment grid. They were harmonic resonators. Think of them less as forts and more as colossal tuning forks, or acupuncture needles inserted into the planet's meridian lines, known as dragon lines or ley lines in Feng Shui. Within each tower, a specific apparatus was housed. Perhaps it was a massive, perfectly cast bronze bell, struck at intervals to create a continuous sonic vibration that the blight found intolerable.
And the Great
A
Wall of
frequency
China
that affirmed the
consists of
pattern of life and reality,
The armies
actively
of the
repelling the
past.
chaos
This is a
and
great
silence
step
of the
for
entity
progress.
from the north. Or maybe it was a series of carefully angled mirrors made of polished obsidian, designed to capture and reflect moonlight or starlight in a specific, purifying pattern. The soldiers stationed there were not just sentries, they were keepers, monks, and technicians, tasked with maintaining the harmonic resonance of their specific sector of the wall. Their duty was not just to watch for enemies, but to listen for the dissonance, to feel for the cold seeping through, and to ensure
So
their tower's
cool.
bell rang true. The threat itself was unlike any human foe. It came from the desolate, windswept plains of the north whispering wastes. It was not an army that could be met in the field. It was a phenomenon. It announced itself not with the sound of war drums, but with an unnerving silence. Birds would stop singing. The wind itself would seem to die. A creeping gray mist would roll in, smelling of static and dust. and with it came an absolute despair. It was an anti-life force. Where it passed,
from
the
this
vibrant
vantage
green of
point,
the grasslands would
you could see the
fade to a
invading
monochromatic,
hordes
brittle
approaching.
gray. Trees would wither in hours, their leaves turning to ash. Animals would become listless, then mad, before simply lying down and ceasing to be. For humans, the effect was even more insidious. It was a psychological plague. People in its path would first feel a profound listlessness and melancholy. Then came the paranoia. They would see shadows move in the corners of their eyes, hear whispers in a language made of static and loss. Memories would begin to fray, emotions would dull, and eventually, they would become little more than hollowed-out shells, wandering aimlessly until their bodies gave out. The blight did not kill. It undid. It unraveled the very pattern of life, consuming sound, color, and consciousness, leaving behind a silent, gray, and utterly empty world. Now, reconsider the history of China through this lens. The rise and fall of dynasties takes on a terrifying new meaning. The mandate of heaven was not just a political concept. It was a literal, cosmological responsibility. An emperor's right to rule was directly tied to his ability to maintain the Great Wall and keep the blight contained. When a dynasty was strong, organized, and prosperous, it had the resources and spiritual will to maintain the wall. They rebuilt crumbling sections with the correct ritualistic materials. They cast new harmonic bells. They trained the wardens of the watchtowers. And they kept the lying pure. During these times, China flourished, basking in the security of its Great Barrier. But when a dynasty weakened, became corrupt, or complacent,
The legend
the wall
of the
would begin to
dragons.
fail. Maintenance would slip. A watchtower's bell might crack
Of course,
and go
that's
unrepaired.
just a myth.
A section of the wall might be rebuilt with common mud and stone, losing its protective alchemy. And through these cracks, the blight would seep. It would start small. A single village in the north would go silent. A harvest would inexplicably fail, the crops turning to gray dust in the fields. A strange madness would grip a remote province. These were the precursors to dynastic collapse. The famines, the peasant rebellions, the social chaos would see them as political or economic failures. But they were symptoms of the blight's encroaching influence, draining the life and sanity from the empire itself. The invading barbarian hordes that history records as the final blow to so many dynasties. Perhaps they were not invaders by choice. Perhaps they were peoples fleeing the advancing blight, driven south in a desperate wave of terror. Their minds already touched by its maddening whispers. The wall was failing, and they were simply the first wave of a much greater horror. This changes our understanding of Chinese culture and technology. The empire's legendary bureaucracy was not just for collecting taxes. Its primary, unspoken purpose was the logistical management of the wall's containment field. The obsession with astronomy and celestial observation was not just for calendars and astrology. It was to predict cyclical celestial alignments that might weaken or strengthen the blight. The development of gunpowder may have been an accidental byproduct of alchemists, trying to create more potent spiritual reagents for the wall's mortar. And what of the Terracotta Army? The tomb of the first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, the man who first truly unified the wall. Why build an army of 8,000 stone soldiers underground? It wasn't to protect him in the afterlife. His tomb is a linchpin, a massive anchor for the entire wall's metaphysical circuit, built on a site of immense terrestrial power. The Terracotta Army is a spiritual failsafe. They are eternal sentinels, their silent ranks facing not outward to protect the tomb, but inward, to contain the very thing the emperor had dedicated his life to walling off. Should a breach ever occur from below, China's historical periods of isolationism were not acts of cultural arrogance. They were a planetary quarantine. The Chinese emperors who sealed their borders were not shutting outsiders out. They were protecting the rest of the world from what they had caged in the north. They bore the terrible burden of being humanity's wardens, knowing that to explain the true nature of the threat would invite panic, disbelief, or worse, morbid curiosity from other nations who might seek to understand, or even harness the power of the blight. They kept their silence and maintained their vigil. So why is this knowledge lost? Why do we now see only a tourist attraction? Because the blight is cyclical, and it receded. For reasons unknown, perhaps tied to cosmic cycles or changes in the Earth's own magnetic field. The entity fell dormant. Its slow, creeping expansion halted and then pulled back, leaving the northern waste silent and empty, but safe. For centuries, the threat diminished. The bells in the watchtowers rang out over empty, quiet plains. The wardens saw nothing but snow in winter and grass in summer. Slowly, inevitably, the true purpose was forgotten. It faded into myth and legend, stories of demons and ghosts in the north that only peasants told. The complex rituals for maintaining the wall became rote traditions, their meaning lost. The alchemical formulae for the mortar were replaced by cheaper, more practical mixtures. The wall's purpose was simplified for the history books into a story that was easier to understand. A barrier against men on horseback. It was a lie born of convenience and the fading of memory. The scholars and emperors who knew the truth may have even encouraged this simplification. Believing the full story was too dangerous for a world of peace. But the wall is still there, and we, in our ignorance, are dismantling it. Not with armies, but with tourism, neglect, and the slow grind of time. Bricks are stolen for souvenirs, each one a bead from a sacred rosary. New roads are blasted through it, creating gaping holes in the containment line. The watchtowers stand empty and silent, their harmonic bells long since melted down for scrap. We are treating a nuclear waste containment facility like a public park. For now, the blight sleeps, but the earth turns, and the great cycles of the cosmos continue. In the deepest, coldest parts of Siberia and the northern steppes, is the silence stirring? Are the colors beginning to fade at the edges of the world? When tourists stand on the Great Wall, snap their photos, and marvel at its scale, they believe they are looking at a monument to the past, a relic of a bygone struggle against a human foe. But what if they are standing on the crumbling cage of a slumbering god of nothingness? As every stolen brick and every unmended crack weakens the ancient ward, we must ask ourselves a terrifying question. What have we been slowly letting back into our world?